Good morning and welcome to Portage First United Methodist Church. All of you out there on the internet and all of you assembled here, we're happy you're here this morning and thank you for joining us in worship today. A few announcements this morning. Today's Gold Can offering is for the Portage Food Pantry, and the Missions Committee would like to remind you that the food pantry has been really slammed over the last few weeks with people who are out of work, so please continue to give generously of your foodstuffs as well as your financially to the food pantry. Our Bible studies have re-begun in the church. If you'd like to join the basics class, please contact Paul Keaton or the Brown Bag Bible Study. Please talk to Wanya Samuelson or just show up. You'll be welcomed. These classes are on Tuesday and Wednesday, so we hope that you'll join them. Also, Super Seniors will be starting back up August 13th at 12 p.m. in the Fellowship Hall. If you have any questions, please contact Judy Holtzman. Finally, the Thursday morning prayer group at Shoop's is continuing to meet at 7 a.m., so come on over to Shoop's at 7 a.m. and join them in the back room for prayer and for breakfast. And with that, are there any other announcements this morning? Well, then why don't you join with me in our call to worship? Oh, one more thing. Yes, there is. We've also done some research this week. They've done some more studies. Sojourners Magazine, Christianity Today, and there was one other. They've discovered that you can actually sing wearing your mask safely. So if you would like to sing while wearing your mask along with the music, well, you're more than welcome to. So that's good news. With this in mind, why don't you join with me in our call to worship as you find it printed in the bulletin. When the storms of life are raging, stand by me. When the world is tossing me like a ship upon the sea, God stands with you in bright sunshine and deepest storm. Please join with our praise team as we sing 10,000 Reasons. Let us pray. Gracious Lord, we come to you now with more than 10,000 reasons to praise you. For the beating of our hearts, for every blade of grass, for fresh summer vegetables, for friendship and being together in your house, all these things we are thankful for. But most of all, God, we praise you for who you are, a God who is holy and loving, a God who is kind and providential, a God who watches over us, a God who intercedes on behalf of us, a God who saw us floundering in sin and brought to us life, a God who is continually faithful. Holy, holy, holy are you, O Lord. The earth is filled with your majesty and glory. Gracious one, we come to you now, offering to you the prayer Jesus taught us, saying, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever and ever. Amen. Well, today we come to the book of Judges, the story of Samson, who for me, when I was growing up, always looked in my mind and my imagination like the cartoon He-Man. By the power of Grayskull, I have the power. And then he was wearing fuzzy breeches, and that to me is what Samson looks like. In my mind, that's what he looked like. And so he almost has this sort of mythic quality to him, this kind of quality where he seems almost cartoonish. And I admit the other part of the story that I always learned about Samson was the story of Samson and Delilah, right? Y'all remember those Bible movies that they used to have? And they'd show them around Easter, and they'd come on television, and Samson and Delilah was one of those, and we kind of watched Samson and Delilah, and it was they recreated the story sort of as a romance, right? Delilah really did love him, and Samson was so in love with her, and it's just a tragic sort of Romeo and Juliet kind of thing. But the reality is the story is much more complicated than that. And so the first thing you need to know about Samson, which you'll read about in Judges chapter 13, is that Samson is one of the miraculous births of the Bible. Now, he is one of 5 miraculous births in the Bible, and miraculous in a very specific way. You'll remember that Abraham and Sarah were in their old age, and they had not been able to have a child. And then God opened their womb, and she was able to have a child. We also remember that Jacob's wife Leah was not able to have a child, and God opened her womb, and she was finally able to conceive, right? And then in the book of 1 Samuel, we hear the story of Hannah and her quest to have a child of her own. And so God opens her womb even later in life. And finally, Zechariah and Elizabeth in the New Testament, the mother and father of John the Baptist, right? They also were late in life, and they were able to have a child. And so now we hear the story, and this is tragic, a gentleman by the name of Manoah, and then it says, and his wife. Our biblical author didn't even give her the dignity of a name. It just calls her his wife. And one day she is in the fields, and she receives a holy man comes to her, a messenger from God, and says, guess what? You're going to finally have a child, and your child is going to save the people from the Philistines, right? And what's interesting about this is that the Philistines, even if you don't know the Bible, right, sometimes Philistine works its way into culture, right? Philistine is a person who's uncultured, right? A Philistine is an enemy of some kind. In fact, I have some non-church friends that I was with this weekend, and there was an ice cream cone, and she bit, I don't know why she did it, but she ate the ice cream cone from the bottom. And when she did this, one of our other friends said, "You Philistine," right? And there's just this idea of these are people who are wrong, right? They're the wrong kind of people. And so this child, this Samson, is supposed to save the people from the hand of the Philistines. And so the woman goes to her husband, and she says, a holy man came to me, and he told me that I'm to have a child. And he said, well, tell him to come back. I want to hear this. And so the man returns. And they don't realize as he's talking that this man is actually the Lord himself, the angel of the Lord, the appearance of the Lord, the messenger of the Lord. And he's right there with them. And so he asks, well, why don't I prepare a meal for you? And the man says, I won't eat, but why don't you prepare an offering to God? And so they ask him about how they're supposed to raise this child. And they find out that Samson is supposed to be special. he's supposed to be something called a Nazirite. Now, a Nazirite is a person who's supposed to have a special kind of consecration to God. They're see, in Numbers chapter 6, there's a description of people who they need something from God, they need clarity from God, they need to hear from God, and maybe they need something from God, and so they consecrate themselves to God, and they're supposed to be people of prayer. So you can kind of think of them as sort of like ancient monks. The idea is that they're supposed to be so consecrated to God that they will hear God's voice. And you're supposed to be able to tell who they are. So they abstain from haircuts. Their hair is just supposed to grow, long and untouched, so that when people see them, they're like, oh, that's a Nazirite. They're listening to God. They're holy people, right? And they're supposed to abstain from wine, but not just wine. Even the appearance of being drunk or alcoholic in any way is supposed to be avoided, so they can't even have grapes or raisins, right? Nothing that could possibly become wine is to touch your lips. And they're never supposed to touch dead bodies. In fact, in Numbers chapter 6, it actually has some rules about if you're in a room and someone suddenly dies and you're a Nazirite, you got to cut off all that hair and you have to consecrate yourself and present some special offerings and start all over again, right? Very, very serious thing. And finally, when their vows are accomplished, when they find out what they need to know from God, they're allowed to finally cut their hair and to burn that hair as an offering to God along with special other offerings. If you want to know more about the Nazirites, again, it's Numbers chapter 6. But the idea is that they're supposed to be some sort of holy person, especially holy. You're supposed to feel holy around them because they are so connected to who God is, right? They're ready to listen to who God is. It's kind of like that first time I went to the monastery, to the Sisters of St. Benedict, and I don't know what I imagined. I thought, the habit and the black and the, all those things, and it was a grand procession into the chapel. It was a very special day for them, so, as a observer, I was just sitting in the chapel waiting for the doors to open and for the service to begin, and the doors opened, and I thought I'd see a bunch of people wearing the long things, but the doors opened, and it was just a bunch of little grandmas, just their floral print blazers and their lovely skirts and their sensible shoes, and I'm like, oh, it's a bunch of grandmas. But that feeling of these are holy women was still very strong. It wasn't what I imagined, but there was still this sense of, gosh, these are women who are really praying to God and seeking God. And you're supposed to feel that when you're around Nazirites. So God explains to this man and his wife, to Manoah and his wife, about how the Nazirites are, their son is going to be a Nazirite from birth, and no razor is ever to touch his head. And then, as they're presenting their offering, the man leaps upon the offering and floats up and ascends into heaven. And Manoah freaks out. He's like, oh no, we've seen God, we're all going to die, oh no, they're coming, the lightning bolts are coming, and his wife says to him, look, if God was going to kill us, he would have done it already. Calm down. And to be honest, what lays before them is probably a very difficult thing. I mean, imagine if you suddenly knew that your first child, is going to be the savior of your nation. That would be a hard person to raise, wouldn't it? And you'd probably be ready to listen to what they have to say at every moment. And there is sort of this sense in which maybe Manoah and his wife were maybe just perhaps too indulgent with Samson, because when we come to chapter 14, he's already a grown adult. And, well, let's just see if we feel that sense of holiness and righteousness and in this Nazirite man. It says in chapter 14, Samson went down to Timnah and saw there a young Philistine woman. When he returned, he said to his father and mother, I have seen a Philistine woman in Timnah. Now go and get her for me as my wife. Really? And I want you to know the Hebrew is just as punchy as the English is. It's just kind of this, I want her, go get her. This is what I want. I can just imagine if I went to the store with my mom when I was a kid and I want that, get it for me. Oh, I can see what would happen, right? But there is this sense of he tells her what he wants. So his father and mother reply, well, isn't there someone among your own people that you would like to marry? Because, must you go to the uncircumcised Philistines in order to find a wife? But Samson said to his father, get her for me. She's the right one for me. His parents did not know that this was from the Lord, who was seeking an occasion to confront the Philistines, for at that time they were ruling over Israel. Samson went down to Timnah together with his father and mother. As they approached the vineyards of Timnah, suddenly a young lion came forward. The Spirit of the Lord came upon Samson in power, so that he tore the lion apart with his bare hands, as he might have torn a young goat. But he told neither his father nor his mother what he had done. Then he went down and talked with the woman, and he liked her. Two astounding things in this story, in this part of the story. Number one, he just killed a lion with his bare hands. This is a strong man, right? This is an incredible feat of strength. Now, I'm told from wildlife experts that lions are actually not as aggressive as many other creatures, that they're basically big cats and kind of lazy, but when they're hungry and they're going to be really ferocious. So Samson tore apart this lion with his bare hands. And then the second part of the story that I find so interesting is verse 7. Then he went down and talked to the woman, and he liked her. So before, when he said, that's the one for me, right? When he said that, he hadn't even had a conversation with her, right? So what does this tell us? What is leading Samson in this story? Was it her wit? Her sparkling conversation? What's leading Samson to think that this is the woman for him? Yeah. It could have been his eyes, could have been a little something further south, but it's not her wit or her conversational skills. He is led by this. I have a name for this. I call it Little Mermaid syndrome. You remember Little Mermaid, that horrible Disney movie? Now, I used to like it when I was a kid, but then I grew up. And that moment when she tells her father, Father, I'm 16, I know what I need, I'm an adult. No, you're not. Right? She decides to leave her entire family for a guy she hasn't even had a conversation with, a guy who literally doesn't even know she exists, and she's willing to throw everything and everyone away. Oh, I just want to put my hands on either side of her and say, you're an idiot, right? There's just this sense. And here we have Samson, it's the same thing. He hasn't even had a conversation with this woman, but she's the one he wants. And his parents indulge him. And so we now come to the wedding feast. Sometime later, he went back to marry her, but he turned aside to look at the lion's carcass. In it was a swarm of bees and some honey, which he scooped out with his hands and ate as he went along. When he rejoined his parents, he gave them some, and they ate it too, but he did not tell them that he had taken the honey from the lion's carcass. Does anyone see a problem here? What's the problem? It's a dead body. He's not only touching a dead body, something that is dead, he's also eating from it, right? He's getting food from it. Now, even if he weren't a Nazirite, to eat food from a dead carcass was considered unclean. Shocking, I know, right? But he's doubled down, right? And do you feel, as you've met Samson thus far, do you feel the sense of holiness? Do you feel like he's a man who's abandoned to God? Do you see him praying? Have you enjoyed the prayers that he's prayed thus far? Oh, wait, he hasn't prayed thus far. He didn't ask God if this is the person he should marry or not. Now his father went down to see the woman, and Samson made a feast there, as was customary for bridegrooms. And when he appeared, he was given 30 companions. These companions are kind of like his groomsmen, but there's also a sense in the Hebrew text that they're also kind of bodyguards to try and protect the people, because Samson is known to be violent. And so he has this moment where he has a feast, and he says, let me tell you a riddle, he said to them. If you give me the answer for the 7 days of the feast, I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes. But if you can't tell me the answer, you must give me 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes. Now, what's happening here, we don't sort of feel it, but in this ancient culture, everyone knows that this is not just rude. It's not just a faux pas. This is dishonoring his family. When a bridegroom throws a wedding, he's supposed to provide for his honored guests, aka his 30 companions, new clothes to wear for the banquet. That's part of the work of the thing, especially if your banquet's already lasting 7 days. What he has essentially done here is, since he doesn't want to pay for it, imagine if you went to a wedding of a family member. You go to this wedding and you have a lovely time and you eat food and you dance, and at the end of the night, the bride and groom hand you a bill. This is literally what he has done here. So, and then he offers them this riddle, a riddle that no one can answer. Matter of fact, I owe Stephen some money. I actually owe Stephen $66 from some tickets he bought online. And I haven't paid him back yet. And I've got the tickets, I got the money right here. I wrote him a check for Stephen over here. And you see it says $66. It's signed and dated and all those things. Hi, Stephen. Here's the money that I owe you. But here's the thing. Why don't I give you a riddle? And if you can answer the riddle, we talked about this, by the way. If you can answer the riddle, then you'll get the money. But if not, I'm just going to keep it. Now, keep in mind, he's owed this money. This is the righteous thing for me to do is to pay him. Stephen, can you answer me the riddle? Would you like to take the wager?
No, I'd rather just take the money.
Again, we discussed this.
Sure.
Okay. How do you make a moron wait?
I don't know how.
I'll tell you later. Here's your money. It's a riddle that's meant to make a fool of the person, right? There's no possible way. It's not even very nice, is it? It's kind of mean-spirited, isn't it? It's not even funny because it's got that edge to it. And so Samson gives his people his own riddle, and here it is. Out of the eater, something to eat. Out of the strong, something sweet. And just for your edification, I put the Hebrew text down there at the bottom too, just so you could see what it looks like. You read it from the left to the right. And the big letters are the consonants, but all the little dots that you see, those are the vowels that were added later on by people called the Masoretes. Those are the vowel sounds that they added. And I just wanted you to see what it looks like. I would read it for you, but I'm terrible at Hebrew and I don't know how to pronounce it. So, but that is what it looks like. But do you see that he hasn't told anyone about this lion, right? He's kept that a secret to himself. So there's no possible way that these people can answer this riddle. And so naturally, he's not going to get out of these people there's no possible way for them to answer. So immediately, this is unfair. So for 3 days, he wouldn't give them any answer. And it says here in verse 15, on the 4th day, they said to Samson's wife, coax your husband into explaining the riddle for us, or we will burn you and your father's household to death. Did you invite us here to rob us? This is how upset they are, how angry they are. Then Samson's wife threw herself on him, sobbing, you hate me, you don't really love me. You've given my people a riddle, but you haven't told me the answer. I haven't even explained it to my mother and father, he replied. So why should I explain it to you? Again, this is a great start to a marriage, isn't it? Do you feel the holiness? Do you feel the love? Do you feel like when you're around him that he's a Nazarite consecrated to God? She cried the whole 7 days of the feast. And I think that that's probably very accurate. She thinks that she and her family and her cousins and her father are all going to be burned alive. So she cries for the whole 7 days of the feast. So on the 7th day, he finally told her because she continued to press him. She in turn explained the riddle to her people. And before sunset on the 7th day, the men of the town said to him, what is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion? And Samson said to them, if you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have answered my riddle. Now, I want you to realize that, number one, this little section, if you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have solved my riddle. This is poetry. It's actually written in poetic verse in its original Hebrew. Also, you don't have to be a great scholar to say, if you plowed with my heifer, this is a really nasty kind of statement, right? You could already feel how dirty that is. And so basically how Samson's response is one of those dirty limericks like we hear in our society, right? There once was a person for fill in the blank. That's what this is. And so again, did he pray? Does he consecrate himself? Does he do anything? No. He just offers this dirty little limerick and throws it back in their faces. And then the Spirit of the Lord comes upon him in power, and he goes down to Ashkelon, a nearby city. Struck down 30 of the men, stripped them of their belongings, and gave their clothes to those who had explained the riddle. Burning with anger, he went up to his father's house, and Samson's wife was given to a friend who had attended him at the wedding. Now again, what's happening here is very, very Middle Eastern, very, very honor culture. If at the end of 7 days, Samson's wife remained unmarried and the marriage remained unconsummated, that would have been a dishonor to her and her family. Even today in the Middle East, because it would have proven, basically what that would have said to the culture around her is that when Samson went to lay with her, he would find out that she wasn't pure or virginal. And oftentimes in the Middle East, the virginity of your daughters is one of the ways you promote the honor of your family. In fact, after the wedding day, and even unto this day in places like Egypt and Saudi Arabia, they will place the sheets outside on the fence around the house to show everyone in the family. There might be some blood on the sheets that proves to everyone that their daughter was virginal and the family honor is established, right? And so in this moment, if she's not married at the end of 7 days, this means that she wasn't holy, she wasn't pure. Now, I'm not saying I support any of this thinking, but the idea is there that so she was given to someone else. Then it says in the beginning of chapter 15, verse 1, later on at the time of the wheat harvest. This shows us that maybe months have passed with no contact between Samson and his former fiancée. Samson took a young goat and went to visit his wife. He said, I'm going to my wife's room, but her father would not let him go in. I was so sure that you thoroughly hated her, he said, that I gave her to your friend. Isn't her younger sister more attractive? Take her instead. So here he is. He's trying to make this right. I know I promised you a daughter. I've got another one. Why don't you date her instead? I thought you hated your wife. I thought this was over with. And Samson said to them, and this is very telling, this time I have a right to get even with the Philistines. I will really harm them. Note that even he seems to realize that the way he's been acting before isn't okay. This time I have the right to get even with them. And the question is, does he really? After abandoning his so-called wife for several months and all of a sudden just showing up and expecting to take his due, is he right to take vengeance on the Philistines? Have they really done him wrong? After he tried to get them to pay for his own wedding, after he killed several of their countrymen to get their clothes, do you feel the sense of holiness in him? Do you feel like this is a holy gentleman? Do you feel like you're close to a gentleman who knows God and who is listening to God? Or do you feel like maybe he's just a spoiled brat? And so he went out and caught 300 foxes and tied them tail to tail in pairs. He then fastened a torch to every pair of tails, lit the torches, and let the foxes loose in the standing grain of the Philistines. He burned up the shucks and standing grain together with the vineyards and the olive groves. Again, how cartoonish, how childish, how comical, how prankster-ish, isn't it? Of all the ways that he could have done this, right? He does it in such a way that animals are harmed, that people are harmed. And what's happened here is that the Philistines many of them will probably starve in the upcoming months because their grain is gone. And I want to underline the fact that everything he seems to do is a big motion, a big movement. He has no sense of subtlety. He clomps around in his life. And so when the Philistines said, who did this? And they find out that it was Samson, they go to Judea, to his own country, to Samson's country, where the Jewish people live, and they go and they encamp there, and the Jewish people are like, what did we do? What's wrong? What's going on? Why are you here? Why did you bring all you? We didn't do anything. And the Philistines reply, we're looking for Samson. We're ready to take care of this problem. And so the Judeans go to Samson and like, are you aware that the Philistines are here? Like they're ready to burn our entire country to the ground. They want you. And they said, we want to take you to the Philistines. And he says to them, so long as you promise not to kill me, we'll go with you. And they're like, fine. So they take Samson to the Philistines. And wouldn't you know it, the power of God comes upon Samson, and he manages to kill all of the Philistines who are there with him. And what he uses to do it is the jawbone of a donkey. And with the jawbone of the donkey, he strikes down about 1,000 men, fighting them all, dead body after dead body. And then he treats us again to his poetry. With a donkey's jawbone, I've made donkeys of them. With a donkey's jawbone, I have killed 1,000 men. And so Samson continues in this way. And at this moment, this is an interesting moment in verse 17. When he finished speaking, he threw away the jawbone at a place called Ramath Lehi. Because he was very thirsty, he cried out to God, "You have given your servant a great victory. Must I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised?" Then God opened up a hollow place in Lehi, and the water came. And when Samson drank to his strength, returned, and he was revived. And the spring in that place is called En-Hakkore, and it is still there in Lehi. Now, do you notice? Were you moved, as I was, at his prayer of thanksgiving that God gave him victory? Wasn't that a lovely prayer saying, "Thanks, God, for all you've done"? No, Samson just goes right on to, "Here's what I want next." Right? Are you seeing holiness? Do you feel a sense of abandonment to God? And when you read Samson's story. And so we come to chapter 16, right? Samson and Delilah. Oh, a story of romance and, well, maybe not so much. Samson, the story begins actually with Samson finding a prostitute. And he goes and he lays with her. And during the night, the people come and the Philistines come and they're ready to arrest Samson again. And so they encamp outside the gates of the city. And so in the morning when Samson comes up, he's going to be coming up and he's going to come out the gates of the city, and they're planning to arrest him. However, Samson wakes up in the middle of the night. And when he sees all the people encamped around the city, he takes the front gate of the city and he rips it off with its gate, with its bar and all. He rips the whole thing off and he puts it on a hillside 3 miles away. Now, even I have to admit, that's kind of funny. I mean, imagine for a moment if you woke up in the morning to find that the front door of your house was ripped off, and then you find it on a hillside 3 miles away, set up just like it's just always been there, still locked. It's kind of funny, right? But he does this, and so the people decide, so the Philistines are like, you know what, we're not dealing with a normal guy. And so they enlist the work of Delilah, and they say, tell us, see if you can find the source of his mighty strength, and we will give you 1,100 shekels of silver. Now, this is a pretty exorbitant amount. This isn't the 30 pieces of silver that Judas got for betraying Jesus. This is actually a pretty powerful bounty, could change the course of her life and her children's lives forever. And so Delilah says to Samson, tell me the secret of your great strength and how you can be tied up and subdued. Samson answered her, if anyone ties me with 7 fresh thongs, 7 fresh bowstrings that have been dried, I've become as weak as any other man. Then the rulers of the Philistines brought to her 7 fresh thongs that had never been dried, and she tied him with them. With men hidden in the room, she called to him, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. But he snapped the thongs as easily as a piece of string snaps when it comes close to the flame. So the secret of his great strength was not discovered. Now, this proves a couple things about this story. Number one, isn't it an amazing thing that he happened to tell her, oh yeah, 7 fresh bowstrings. If I'm tied up with those, I won't be able to break them. And next thing you know, he's tied up with 7 bowstrings. Why didn't he seem to notice? The answer is probably, number one, that he was in love with her. That this is actually a person that he actually cares about. That this is actually a situation in which he really is overlooking a lot of things because he really does love her. The second thing that it tells us is that Delilah got mad skills, y'all. She's a very good manipulator. She very much has him wrapped around her little finger. She very much is in control of this situation. So Delilah says to Samson, you've made a fool of me. You lied to me. Come now, tell me how you can be tied. He said, if anyone ties me securely with new ropes that have never been used, I will become as weak as any other man. So Delilah took new ropes and tied him with them. And then the men hidden in the room, she called to them, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. But he snapped the ropes of his arms as if they were threads. Isn't that strange? He just told her new rope, and all of a sudden, he's tied up with new rope. Isn't that interesting? Would you all fall for that? But Samson does. Because when you're in love, right, you overlook a multitude of things. Delilah then said to Samson, until now you've been making a fool of me and lying to me. Tell me how you can be tied. If you weave the seven braids on my head into the fabric on a loom and tighten it with a pin, I'll become as weak as any other man." So while he was sleeping, Delilah took the 7 braids of his head, wove them into the fabric, and tightened it with a pin. Then she called him, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." He woke from his sleep and pulled the pin and the loom with the fabric. Now, again, I can kind of see, like, maybe if you thought the Philistines had tied him up before, or maybe the Philistines had done all that stuff while he was sleeping. But how exactly do you get your hair tied up into a loom without that being something really specific, right? And yet, it happens. And do you also notice this? He is wearing down, because for the first time in one of these deceptions, he's mentioned his hair, which really is the source of his power. Again, she called to him, then she said to him, "How can you say I love you when you won't confide in me? This is the 3rd time you've made a fool of me and haven't told me the secret of your great strength." And with such nagging, she prodded him day after day until he was tired to death. Then he told her everything. "No razor has ever been touched to my head," he said, "because I have been a Nazirite, set apart to God since birth. And if my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as any other man." And when Delilah saw that he had told her everything, she sent word to the rulers of the Philistines, "Come back once more. He has told me everything." So, with the silver in their hands, having put him to sleep on her lap, she called a man to shave off the 7 braids of his hair, and so began to subdue him, and his strength left him. Then she called, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you," and he awoke from his sleep. "I'll go out as before, and shake myself free." But he did not know that the Lord had left him. Then the Philistines seized him, gouged out his eyes, and took him down to Gaza, binding him with bronze shackles. They set him to grinding in a prison, but the hair on his head began to grow again after it had been shaved. So we see in this moment Samson's final moment of reckoning, right? Now he is given a physical blindness to mirror the spiritual blindness with which he has lived his entire life. Just like St. Paul on the road to Damascus, he has been given a physical blindness to mirror the way he has been living. Now his spiritual blindness is coupled with a physical blindness, and he is set to work pushing on a millstone day after day. A job usually reserved for oxen is now given to Samson. But, as I told you before, the book of Judges, the author of the book of Judges tends to like to keep things, just tell the story, just the facts. But when he decides to throw in some little comment, little something, you always have to pay extra special attention. Did you notice in verse 32, "But the hair on his head began to grow again after it had been shaved"? This little note there that he's giving to us that tells us that the story is not over. A literary device that he uses to give us a clue to what's to happen next. So the Philistines gather for a festival in the temple of Dagon. By the way, in terms of old world gods, Dagon is a real monster. Babies sacrificed to Dagon. He's a real monster. And so they're having their celebration, and they decide to have Samson brought out to entertain the crowd. They're going to make fun of him. They're going to mistreat him. "Bring out Samson to entertain us." So they called Samson out of prison, and he performed for them. And when they stood among the pillars, Samson said to the servant who held his hand, "Put me where I can feel the pillars that support the temple, that I may lean against them." And the temple was crowded with people, all there for the festival, men and women and the rulers of the Philistines. And then, it says in verse 28 in chapter 16, then Samson prayed to the Lord. Then Samson prayed to the Lord. Then Samson prayed to the Lord. "O sovereign Lord, remember me. O God, please strengthen me just once more, and let me with one blow get revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes." Then Samson reached toward the 2 central pillars on which the temple stood, bracing himself against him, his right hand on one and his left hand on the other. Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." And he pushed with all his might, and down came the temple on the Philistines with all the people in it, and he killed more people when he died than when he lived. And then his brothers and his father and his whole family went down to get him. They brought him back, and buried him in Zorah and at Eshtaol in the tomb of Manoah, his father. He had led Israel just 20 years. And so the story of Samson comes to an end. A life that was supposed to be consecrated towards God, supposed to be consecrated towards prayer, and yet he does not do so until the very, very end. At least here, he addresses God. At least at the end, he recognizes his need for God. And the powerful thing about this story isn't so much that Samson misbehaved his entire life, but it is the fact that despite that misbehavior, despite the fact that he should have been consecrated to God and pretty much wasn't throughout his entire life, despite the fact that he was led around by his desires and led around by his lust and led around by his desire for food or for whatever he wanted at the moment, despite that, God still listens to him. At the very end of his life, God still hears him and sees him. And doesn't that speak to the goodness of God? The story of Samson brings with it several warnings about leadership, about what a leader should be like. And one of the first things that a leader should be is abandoned to God, that they should abandon their self-interest and seek after God first and foremost. We see what it is like when a leader is led by their desire, by their lust, by their desire for power, their desire for everyone to look up to them. We see what that is like. We see it in our churches. Have you ever had those committee meetings where someone is running the show and they have run the show because their dad ran the show and no one's ever going to go up against them? Have you ever seen those sorts of institutions of power here in your local church? Or maybe you've been in your office or your place of work and you see people and you know those people that are led more by what they can get than what they can do for their coworkers around them or for the company they work for. It's all about them, right? And perhaps you've seen in national leadership, as you look at the leaders of our nation, you know the people who are interested in public service as versus the people who are interested in exemplifying themselves. Samson is a cautionary tale that if we are led by a desire for our own self-aggrandizement, for our own pleasure, for our own lives, it leads eventually to destruction. And it's interesting to me that God still continues to use Samson to accomplish his desires, but it comes at such a cost for Samson and for his family, for the people around him. If Samson had been abandoned to God the way he was supposed to be from birth, how might his story have been different? How might the exploits of his great strength have been much more positive and holy and healthy? Samson seemed to be led around by what he wanted at all times, but a leader of people, a judge of Israel, a person, a pastor, a committee chairperson, all of these people, they have to be a persons who are willing to listen to God. That's what's most important. And yet still, God still accomplishes freedom for his people. God still listens to Samson in the last moment. There are many people who find God on their deathbed. There are many people who find God in the last moments. And doesn't it speak powerfully of God's love and mercy that he listens? That sometimes when these moments come, these last moments, a simple declaration, "Oh God, help me," is actually answered by a God who loves and who cares. Isn't it powerful? Isn't it a powerful thing that God listens to Samson and gives him what he needs? God shows tremendous mercy and allows Samson to accomplish his great task, allows him to save his people from the Philistines, invites him into that process, and God heard him. I think that truly is amazing grace. Well, dear brothers and sisters, before we conclude today, I want to give you a word of warning about next week's sermon. Next week's sermon comes from the book of Judges, chapter 19. It's referred to as the story of the Levite and his concubine, or also the story of the prostitute of Gibeah, and it is rated R. It involves rape, it involves bodily mutilation. It is a horrifying story. So with that in mind, adults only. No children next Sunday. I hate to say that in church, but it's the point. This particular story is the point of the entire book of Judges. Like, this is where it's all been leading to, is this story. Having said thus, it's going to be tough. It's tough to preach. It's tough to talk about. It's just very violent and very literally blood covered. So just parents, watch it first, and you can decide what parts of it to share with your children, but just know it's a tough, tough story. With that in mind, I invite you now to be blessed in the name of our Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, that going forth from this place, the world may know that God loves them, and even in their last moment, God is still willing to listen and to care. Be blessed, and go in peace to love and serve the Lord.